Advance your learning skills. Globalization has developed in an unprecedented manner. American English has emerged as the dominant language in globalization. The result is a great demand for learning American English conversational skills. Military Christian leaders also need English language skills in this new world. The Military Christian Fellowship, MCF, of Ukraine recognized this need some years ago and felt that the provision of conversational English language skills could help Christian leaders grow and develop and help them reach out to others with the gospel. The Association for Christian Conferences, Teaching and Service, ACCTS, with its mission of assisting in the development of Christian leaders in the armed forces of the world and in the establishment and growth of military Christian fellowships, MCFs, responded in 2001 to this need by offering English conversational skills at a week-long English camp in Ukraine. The American English Language Training, a program of ACCTS, has grown out of this initial experience. This program provides English language conversational skills instruction for persons who are beginners in the language, or will build on any English skills individuals already have by helping them to speak American English better. It helps carry out the mission of ACCTS through this program, the purpose of which is to assist in the establishment or growth of MCFs and reach out with the gospel in that nation. As the demand for English programs among MCFs has grown, it has become necessary to formalize training in order to establish and run English programs successfully. This teacher handbook has been developed to meet that need. It provides a description of the program and an understanding of how a foreign language is learned and the how-tos of teaching English to speakers of other languages, so as to give teachers a foundation in providing instruction for their classes. The general purpose of the program is to assist in the establishment and growth of military Christian fellowships, MCFS, and in reaching out with the gospel to the nations of the world. For now, here is a list of tips and advice for learning English through the best English stories. Just listen first and foremost. You don't need to do much more than listen to the episodes. I realized a while ago that many of the English students I met at school in London were not exposed to enough authentic English. They were willing to spend money and travel around the world to improve their English, but for some reason, the majority of them were unwilling to set aside some time each day to listen to something in English. Why? I believe this is due in part to their inability to discern what they were hearing. Many people watch television and movies in English. Fine. However, that may not be the most effective way to improve your English. Film is highly visual. A lot of what you learn from a movie is through visual storytelling. It's critical to focus solely on the audio and the language. As a result, many students weren't sure what to listen to. They felt they didn't have much choice. Actually, there is a lot of choice out there. The BBC has many podcasts. There are numerous podcasts on iTunes covering a wide range of topics, but they are all designed for native speakers. They're difficult to listen to, and that's not motivating. There are some podcasts designed specifically for English learners, but many of them prioritize language learning over entertainment. They're useful, but a little dull. This is less true now because, 5 years after starting this podcast, there are more interesting things available for English learners, including my podcast. So I decided to try to create something for English learners to listen to that they would enjoy listening to in addition to learning English. Ultimately, I believe that in order to listen to English for extended periods of time, you must be interested in what is being discussed or find it entertaining. Otherwise, it's difficult to maintain concentration, and it feels like a chore. There is real value in listening to English for long periods of time, but it's difficult to do because you're put off by not understanding things or because the recording is patronizing and dull. I don't want to brag too much about my podcast because I'm sure it's not always as entertaining or engaging as it could be, but I believe the only way to keep people listening is to try to make it both entertaining and informative about English. So I record this podcast with you in mind, but I try to remain as authentic as possible. I try not to be simplistic. I try not to grade my English excessively. I understand how difficult it can be for you at times, but I try to keep your attention by speaking enthusiastically about topics that interest me. Hopefully, as a result, you will continue to listen and feel personally involved. Then, by exposing yourself to a lot of English in this way, you can acquire the language and pick it up in a number of ways. Let me now discuss Stephen Krashen's language acquisition theory. This theory is well known among language learning theorists and serves as the foundation for much of what we know about learning and teaching English. Krashen believed that there were two approaches to improving our language learning skills. The first is through language acquisition, while the second is through language learning. Language acquisition means that adults and children can learn language subconsciously or passively by simply engaging with it. The important thing is to concentrate on the message in a bit of language. So, when listening to the Best English Stories podcast, focus on what I truly mean rather than just the specific language I'm using. The primary goal is to understand what I mean, hopefully at a fairly deep level, so that you can laugh at or be moved by something I've said. And then you pick up the language as a result. You might not realize you've learned a new language in this way. In fact, this type of acquisition most likely contributes to your passive knowledge of the language. Krashen defines language learning as a different type of language development. This is when you focus on learning specific forms, such as grammar rules. It entails receiving some instruction from a teacher, possibly in the form of error correction, or from a grammar book that explains the rules of English. The disadvantage of this type of learning is that it is very dogmatic, can be boring, complex, and abstract. It does not necessarily replicate the organic way in which we learn language as children, and it does not fully allow for the subconscious acquisition of language that occurs simply by engaging with the language in order to understand a message being communicated. Okay, so how does this relate to how you can learn English? Well, I think it's critical to incorporate both aspects of language learning into your life. This is what I consider a balanced diet. You should not simply study the grammar rules in a dogmatic manner, though this is undoubtedly important. You should also try to engage with the language as it is used in everyday, authentic, and meaningful situations. How do you do that? Ideally, this would entail venturing out into the world and doing things in English. In fact, this could be the most effective way to improve your English. If you get a job that requires you to speak English all day, you will quickly improve. It'll be extremely difficult, but you'll be forced to improve. That's similar to a language acquisition boot camp in that you're attempting to survive in the language rather than studying it. You're really focused on the communicative acts you want to achieve. You're very focused on meaningful messages, and you'll naturally learn the most direct and effective way to understand and communicate them. You might not be able to accomplish that in your lifetime. You may not have access to native speakers in that way. So, my podcast can be a substitute. It's not the same as trying to work in an English-speaking environment, but the key point is that you can replicate aspects of that experience by simply attempting to follow or keep up with what I'm saying. If you do this on a regular basis over a long period of time, you'll learn a lot of English. So just listen, try to follow everything I say, try to enjoy and interact with it. Maintain a regular listening schedule. Listen for an extended period of time. As Stephen Krashen explains, all of this will help you learn English, that is, language acquisition. But you can also learn more traditional languages while listening to the Best English Stories podcast. First and foremost, in addition to listening to the episodes, you can do formalized language study from a book or in class and supplement it with LEP. Study the language and then try to notice aspects of it that you've learned in previous podcast episodes. For example, if you've studied verb tenses, you can listen to a story I've told on the podcast and try to notice the verb tenses, how I use them, how I pronounce them, and so on. It can provide support, confirmation, or clarification for your language studies. You should always use authentic language usage to check the language you've studied. You can also dig deeper into the topics I discuss in the podcast. The podcast can be used as a study tool. Here are a few ways to use the podcast for active language study. Use transcripts. You could read a transcript and look up new words in a dictionary as you discover them. Pay attention to how I use the words, including their grammatical context, collocations, and pronunciation. Take note of any new words or structures you come across and practice using them on your own. You could try to write your own transcript. This explains a lot about the difference between the English you know and the English I use on the podcast. Try transcribing a section of a single episode. You could do an already transcribed episode. Listen carefully and try to write down every word. There may be some utterances that you cannot identify. Mark them with question marks. Listen again and again. You could simply focus on a 5-minute segment of an episode. Continue listening until you've done your best. Check the appropriate transcript for that section and compare it to what you wrote. What is the difference? Now you can see the difference between what you understand and what I said. Try to close the gap. Check the words you didn't recognize. Determine why you missed the pronunciation of something. Consider how I pronounce and define these words and phrases, then you can incorporate them into your English. In a few minutes, we'll discuss ways to improve your speaking skills. A note about transcripts. You may be aware that many of my episodes include transcripts, which can be extremely useful in studying the language. But you should not read them all the time. However, you can also contribute transcriptions to my channel if you'd like. To transcribe a few minutes of an episode, please send it to me so that I can correct it and publish it on my channel. I'm working on a transcript collaboratively using Google Docs. You might already be aware of this because I did an episode on the subject a few months ago. To learn more, visit my channel and click on transcripts. Basically, writing transcripts of my episodes is not only a great way to use the podcast to improve your English, but it also allows me to provide a better service to my audience. So, the Best English Stories podcast should be consumed as part of a well-balanced diet. Listen freely and simply try to enjoy and understand what I'm saying, allowing your mind to naturally acquire the language. However, combine this with more formalized language study to get the full 360-degree effect. You might think that formalized language study is boring and time-consuming. That is fine. You do not need to do any of that. But as a compromise, you can simply be mindful while listening. Your primary goal is to concentrate on the message, but you can also try to identify specific aspects of the language. Try to recognize words, phrases, and grammatical structures. You don't need to formally study them, simply notice them as you hear them. Oh, he says depend on, so it should be depend on in English, not depend of. Things like that. Just be mindful while listening. I record various types of episodes here. My primary goal is to engage and keep you interested while presenting English to you in an authentic manner. In some episodes, I try to focus your attention on the language more specifically. For example, I may teach, explain, or demonstrate vocabulary items related to a topic or draw your attention to an aspect of pronunciation. In those episodes, you can simply relax and listen to what I say, or you can be more active and take notes on the vocabulary. Try to remember the phrases, listen again, and pause the recording to test your memory. Listen comfortably and enjoy the experience. Krashen also addresses the effective filter hypothesis. This is about the learning conditions and how they can have a significant impact on successful language acquisition. Essentially, good learning conditions are those that promote motivation. The listener is eager to understand what is being said and learn the language, increase self-esteem, and relaxation. These things allow the flow of acquisition to move freely without being obstructed. Mental blocks occur when a learner is stressed, anxious, or self-critical. This creates a mental barrier to language acquisition. I suppose this is one of those situations where you're in an unhappy language class. You are stressed due to teacher pressure or peer judgment. You lack self-confidence because you do not receive positive reinforcement from participating in a communicative exchange, and you simply do not enjoy being in the classroom. As a result, there is a psychological barrier that prevents you from learning anything. In fact, it may make matters worse because you associate learning English with painful or boring classroom situations. The advantage of Best English Stories English podcast is that it often focuses on having fun. You have nothing to fear or be concerned about if you listen to this. In fact, it can be a highly enjoyable experience. I'm not just praising myself here. I understand what it is like to listen to your favorite podcast. It is quite a personal experience. On my way to work, I listened to Mark Kermode and Simon Mayo's film review podcast, and I can't describe how much I enjoy it. They're like my friends, and I'm having a great conversation with them. I listen to their voices privately through headphones while sitting on smelly underground trains, surrounded by unhappy people. But I am in my comfort zone. In fact, sometimes I'm disappointed when I arrive at the metro station because I just want to keep listening to the podcast. Hopefully, listening to Best English Stories English podcast will provide a similar experience for you. That is certainly the idea. This should be a personal and enjoyable experience for you, and I invite you to simply enjoy being a part of the podcast community while remembering that other people around the world are listening to me ramble on about stuff. There is no chance that the effective filter will give you a mental block in this situation because you should be in your comfort zone. That's the benefit of podcasting. You can listen to this whenever and wherever you want, and you can make yourself as comfortable as you like. As I've previously stated, feel free to listen to this in the bath, on the L, or as you gently and slowly drift off to sleep at night. Of course, you can listen at your desk while holding a pen or typing to take notes or write transcripts. You can also sit upright and read transcripts. It is up to you. The most important thing is to have fun and allow the English to sink in. Imagine my voice bouncing around in your head with many of the words and sounds stuck in there. You should definitely listen to episodes more than once. In fact, if you want to really learn English. From this podcast, I believe you should listen multiple times. Once isn't enough. In fact, listening once may only scratch the surface. Listening repeatedly will help you become very familiar with what is being said. You will notice and remember details that you missed the first time. Repetition is extremely important for helping your brain recognize patterns. After a few listens, you'll remember specific phrases, bits of intonation, or responses, which will be reinforced when you listen again. It may be asking too much of you, but you could even begin to remember and repeat some of what you've heard on Best English Stories English podcast. I don't expect you to repeat everything I say, but you could memorize the lines of a comedy sketch that I show you and then repeat them to yourself, your friend, or simply while listening again. I'm a bit of a geek and I really enjoy Star Wars. When I was a kid, I used to watch Star Wars on repeat. I would watch it again and again. Now I remember every line from the film. In fact, I remember not only the lines, but also the music and sound effects that appear throughout the film. It's the same with Monty Python's films and sketches. I've seen them so many times that I can recite much of the script from memory, and some of the phrases have even made their way into my vocabulary. You can also do so by listening to episodes multiple times and watching some of the comedy sketches I've shown you several times. Soon, I'll be doing an episode about Monty Python. For some reason, Monty Python sketches are extremely memorable. In fact, several generations of people in the UK and America grew up watching Monty Python films and can recite entire sketches to one another. Again, you can do the same thing. Recognize that there are some incredibly funny things in English and use that as a way to learn the language. English can be used to focus on a variety of topics and skills. I've already discussed the benefits of simply listening for fun versus actively listening. I did mention that it's important to be comfortable while listening. I should also mention that I believe it is important to try to listen to things you don't fully understand. It is acceptable to listen to things you do not fully understand, and the general consensus appears to be that you should push yourself when listening and not be discouraged if there are things you do not understand during that difficult experience. Your brain is really piecing things together. For example, if you don't understand my conversation with Daniel Burt, that's fine. In fact, the struggle is beneficial. Listen again and keep trying. Do not give up. Push through the moments when you don't understand. Keep going. Don't let confusion deter you. Also, try to detect subtle differences in accents. You may notice minor differences at first, but you will become increasingly aware of the differences between accents. You'll eventually be able to say things like, "This guy is from the north of England, and this one is from Australia." Reading transcripts on my channel, outside of the podcast, read a variety of texts again. Look for things that you enjoy. You should also be aware of your motivation for learning the language. What do you intend to use English for in the future? You might need to read emails or business reports. It may be worthwhile to read articles discussing business trends.
Otherwise, read any word. Otherwise, simply reading a well-written text for pleasure is an excellent way to improve your literacy. I need to add a lot of videos to my channel with reading recommendations. There are numerous reading options available, including blogs and newspapers, as well as books that can be downloaded for free online. I haven't done it yet, but I intend to provide you with a list of recommended reading materials.
Writing, once again, is not one of the topics I focus on frequently on Best English Stories English podcast. You could also start your own blog and share your thoughts or perspectives on a particular topic. Please feel free to respond to episodes of my podcast in the comment section. You should try to express your opinion concisely and in a structured manner, using the most appropriate words you can find, including some words you learned from that episode of the podcast. Consider the person reading the comment. Make it easy and enjoyable for them to read and focus on stating exactly what you want to say in a clear and efficient manner. Consider these ideas to improve the effectiveness of your writing. If you need to practice writing for the IELTS test, you will need to do more specific writing practice, most likely with an IELTS preparation book or an IELTS course of some kind. My podcast can help you with general skills, vocabulary, and so on, but you should also practice writing for specific types of work. Practice, practice, practice. As I previously stated, to get the most out of Best English Stories English podcast, incorporate it into a well-balanced diet. Speaking, perhaps the best way to improve your speaking skills is to practice in real-life situations. The requirements of that situation will teach you to say the right things at the right time and in the right tone. You should be aware of how important intonation is in conveying a message. These are the things you can learn by engaging in meaningful communication and learning from your mistakes. You may also need a teacher to actively correct your mistakes, but you can definitely use Best English Stories English podcast to improve your speaking skills. Let's look at a few options. Simply try to incorporate some aspects of my speech into your own speech. You could simply add some words or phrases you've learned from me and use them yourself, or you can learn some speech patterns and pronunciation from me and incorporate them into your own speech if you like. You can use my speech as a model for your own. More specifically, you could copy and paste some of my sentences, listen to a line I say, and then repeat it, attempting to sound exactly like me. You could listen to phrasal verb episodes and pause when I say an example sentence, then repeat it after me. Continue doing this until you believe your version is fairly similar to mine. So just listen and practice until you can make the same sounds as me. Consider vowel and consonant sounds, consonant combinations, and how to pronounce them. Consider connected speech. What happens when words are pronounced fluently together in a sentence? They might be pronounced differently. Certain sounds may be dropped or added when words are linked. Pay attention to these aspects of pronunciation. I've been thinking about doing an episode on connected speech for a long time. Choose an excerpt from the podcast's transcript and record yourself saying it. Compare your version to my version, then work on the transcript. Underline the stressed words. Draw lines to represent pauses for emphasis. Recognize word links in pronunciation. Listen to me say that excerpt again and double-check your scripted transcript. Now record yourself doing it again, this time with intonation, pausing, and sentence stress. Compare that with the original. This can help you become more aware and in control of your speech patterns. Record yourself simply speaking in response to one of my podcast episodes. If I haven't talked about UFOs yet, but I plan to, you could record yourself talking about them as well. Try to include any words I've given you on that topic. If you want, you can leave an audio comment on my audiobook page to let everyone know how you feel about something. Alternatively, you could start your own podcast, as Dank of Dank's English podcast does. He's not a native speaker, but after hearing a suggestion in one of my episodes, he decided to launch his own podcast. He now has followers and listeners, and he is very into it. Listening to his episodes, I sense that his confidence is growing and that he is discovering his own voice. It must be very beneficial for his English, which is already excellent. You could do it as well if you wanted. The most important thing is practice. Take advantage of all available practice opportunities. Join clubs to meet fellow English speakers. Use the internet. Find groups on meetup.com where people are doing language exchanges. Push yourself outside of your comfort zone. Do not be shy. Give it a try. Take the initiative. Nobody can speak for you. There is no shame in making mistakes. You have to be there to win it. So open your mouth and start talking. Remember that English is about what you can accomplish, not just what you know. Be active. Find your voice in English. Avoid being one of those quiet students in class. It's entirely up to you to start talking.
And why not do it in the confines of a language classroom? That's the entire point.
Speak up in class and use it as a safe space to experiment and make mistakes. Experiment. Turn off your editor. Don't listen to the voice in your head that tells you to remain silent or that you can't say anything because it might be wrong. It doesn't matter if you're incorrect. Remember that you have to say something incorrectly about 5 times before getting it right. Get through those 5 times quickly, and you'll be fine. Sometimes opening your mouth is the most difficult thing to do, but once you start speaking, it becomes easier. Maintain the momentum. Keep your voice warm. Maintain a positive attitude. Enjoy expressing yourself. If you participate actively in class, your teacher will be delighted. In fact, you should demonstrate to your teacher that you are making an effort. We always enjoy talkative and positive students. Use this to your advantage. You'll be more likely to achieve good grades and advance to the next level. Be nice, be friendly, be talkative. However, you should also listen to and help others. That is the recipe for success for any language learner. Actually, I just sent Zek a message asking for his thoughts on using LEP to improve your English, especially speaking, and here are his comments, which I completely agree with. In fact, before I read his comments, I should remind you that Zek is a well-qualified English teacher from the Czech Republic who has lived in the UK for several years and holds a master's degree in English language, so he knows exactly what he's talking about. I'm sure many of you listening to this have similar suggestions and comments on the subject. I strongly encourage you to share that information. You can leave text or audio comments for this episode. So, here are Zdenek's comments. How does listening to LEP help you improve your speaking skills? It can primarily improve the following skills and sub-skills. 1. Listening, obvious. 2. Reading, spelling, reading scripts, and extra notes. 3. Writing. Spell, script, provide feedback, or send thank you emails to the best English stories. 4th, listening to grammar patterns as part of the exposure theory. 5. Vocabulary. Learning new vocabulary is also influenced by the exposure theory. 6. Pronunciation, passive listening. Speaking, however, is a different question. If you want to improve your speaking with LEP, you must approach it actively. Not everybody is willing to do this. Some people are shy, have anxiety when approaching others, and so on, and prefer to listen to podcasts as passive recipients. That's fine, however. Here are some suggestions for improving your speaking skills. 1. Contact someone from the LEP community. Many interesting people from all over the world want to learn English. Contact people with similar skill levels to you. This way, everyone can benefit and learn from one another without becoming bored. Ideally, share an interest in science fiction films and sports. You already have one important topic in common. Try to befriend these people, add them to Facebook, start Skype conversations with them or something. 2. Make a recording of yourself speaking about a topic. Ask yourself questions about LEP, answer these questions, or simply practice vocabulary that the best English stories teach you. Listen to yourself, try to correct your errors, record again, and compare your later recordings to see how you've improved. 3. Make comments in Audioboo, maximum of 3 minutes. Why are people so shy? Is everyone afraid of being judged? Who cares? Simply be friendly, and you should be accepted by the community. Best English stories. As a school teacher, every day he faces mistakes. We all make mistakes. Never be afraid of making mistakes. A man who never made mistakes never accomplished anything. Are you afraid of taking on a challenge and confronting our greatest fear? Public humiliation? Don't be. If we fight it actively and fearlessly, we can significantly improve our speaking skills. I'd just like to add a few points about making a fool of yourself, my experience speaking French, and my fear of public speaking. Consider running your own podcast. The majority of you can do it. Again, it's simply about confronting your fears of making mistakes and exposing yourself to the public. This podcast could be just for you and your friends. I make a lot of mistakes in my podcast, and I'm a teacher. I feel ashamed and have to remove them. But if you're not a teacher, why worry? Even as teachers, you should not be concerned. You can always talk to yourself in the mirror and go crazy. Be the next Hamlet. Speaking is not about sitting back and doing nothing, so get up and interact. Note: by following these tips, you will actively improve your English speaking skills, pronunciation, grammar, and vocabulary. You can focus on trying to use the best expressions. Listening skills have been taught to you through English stories, such as when you listen to your friends talk.
There are numerous advantages to active speaking practice. Thanks, Zdenek. As I previously stated, I welcome your comments. Let us discuss this subject together. To be honest, I've already discussed enough grammar and vocabulary. Just a quick reminder of the exposure theory. I've discussed this before. The idea is that by listening to a lot of English for an extended period of time, you are feeding your subconscious with all of the English usage patterns. Your brain hears all of these English patterns. including common word combinations such as prepositions, tenses, pronunciation features, and so on. Finally, it all goes into your head and informs your language instinct, so that when you take an English test, you feel the answer. You know that this preposition goes with this verb because you've heard it several times before, and it feels natural. Fill your head with English, feel English rather than knowing it. Use the Force, young Jedi, and remember that it will be with you always. Oh, and remember, you're never too old for this. Language study is an excellent way to keep your mind active and flexible. My grandfather is over 90 years old and still very sharp. Perhaps this is because he still attends French and Spanish classes on a regular basis. Many of the tips provided here will help you with your pronunciation. However, I'd like to point out that improving your listening skills will also naturally improve your pronunciation skills. The two things go hand in hand. The more you understand natural spoken English, the better you'll be able to decode the sounds that make it. Understanding this natural sound code can help you start using it. Listening and pronunciation are inextricably linked. But in order to reap the full benefits, you must actively practice pronunciation. The methods I've already mentioned in this episode, such as repeating, recording, re-recording, comparing, and speaking in front of a mirror, are all effective ways to practice and improve your pronunciation. Don't be shy, give it a try. You have nothing to lose, only something to gain. Go for it. Discourse is primarily concerned with the structure of your speech. How do you link your ideas together? When you listen, try to notice any specific phrases I use to connect my ideas, transition from one topic to another, deal with moments when I'm unsure of what I'm saying, and so on. What tools do I use to perform specific tasks? Can you identify and deal with these issues on your own? Try discussing a topic for 5 minutes. See how difficult it is to speak on your feet. Repeat until you develop methods of thinking and talking simultaneously. Pay attention to how people interrupt, agree, disagree, or otherwise interact during discussions. Consider how we use language to communicate politely or indirectly. How do we add humor to what we say? How does intonation affect the hidden meaning of our words? Listen to these ideas and then put them to the test when you speak. That's all for this episode. I hope you found it motivating and inspirational. Please leave a comment, and best wishes for maintaining your English skills. I'm sure you're doing well. You must be.